we learn so much to look, what do other people think of us? Yeah, we are so engulfed in this, what developmental psychologists call the social self. Yeah, who am I in vis-a-vis my neighbor, vis-a-vis my colleague? And in many German corporations, people, their main goal is not to stick out, not to be authentic, not to be original, but just not to make any mistakes. If you really want to create exciting, innovative solutions, you need to come from a different place. You need to come from a place where you are in touch with your own excitement, with, what motivates you, what you find deeply interesting, what is not what somebody else finds deeply interesting. Yeah. And so this shift as a collective, as a society, of how we move from a society which is pretty conformist to one which is much more self-authoring, where you are much more you're the driver of your own life, but also then even transcends that and be self-transcending and work for higher social goals. That really is a psychological maturation process, which I think an institution like yours can really, really be an exciting part of, if you work from an understanding that your programmers are not just little, working machines, but have the freedom to discover and express themselves in different ways, and also then to do that in their work.
One of the goals that we have in 42 Wolfsburg is to combine the excellent technical education that you get by learning how to program with really hands-on projects to code, very little theory in that regard. But then there is the mindset aspect that makes you a happy software engineer. So for that, I see two aspects particularly important. One is the entrepreneuring, the innovating, the being creative, the finding opportunities. And the other one is the being responsible and owning what you do with the good, the bad, and the ugly, and really taking ownership, taking responsibility for that.
For me, what has been really an interesting development is that I see less and less the tools, the applications, the platforms, less the technology, but more the digital principles behind it, and how digitization changes our world in its structures, and how we really see and understand the world. And for me, there are a few developments which are really exciting, where the world is becoming more decentralized in many ways, where it's becoming more fluid, more fast changing, more flexible. But all of that means that we are reducing fixed structures which we need, or which we have used for our own stability. And we as human beings need to be, we need a certain amount of safety and stability in order to be innovative and creative and grow. And because we are reducing so many outside factors for stability in our world, and also in our working environment, where we reduce hierarchies, we reduce the number of rigid processes in our work. And all of that means that people need to find a sense of stability elsewhere. If you can't find it in the outside world, you need to find it within yourself.
Joana, welcome.
Hi, Max.
Welcome to the 42X podcast. This is a session where we really deep dive into the passions and expertise of our guests. And so we hope we give you enough space and some context to react to in the next hour or so. For our guests, Joana and I have met about, I think, a year and a half or so ago, 2 years ago, when I was still at Google, and Joana did what she's very good at and doing for much longer and evolving, which is organizing civil society in Germany in terms of digitization, helping civil society to find entrepreneurial models to improve its impact, and over the last years, more and more thinking about our inner constitution and the right approach to work and ourselves in these digital environments. You're more than welcome to correct anything I say and jump in. Now, today, I'm looking forward to have a conversation with you about the aspects I just mentioned, and especially maybe going into the notions of education and learning that you consider appropriate and maybe forward-looking progressive in the sphere, and how to use the digital for that. Before we jump into the conversation, let me share a little bit of background about Joana, which I happily learned about quite a bit when I prepared for this session. So Joana studied social anthropology at the Ludwig-Maximilian University in Munich, and then did her dissertation in that field, with work also in Berkeley in California, as well as the University College in London. Then there was a lot happening privately and professionally that I'm going to skip over and jump to 2007, when she co-founded the online donation platform betterplace.org, which I believe has always been more, but when you look at it now, it's really a network of organizations and ventures promoting civil society activities in Germany and beyond. Her particular field was the research lab that was founded in 2010 and is really well established in Germany as a source for reports and intelligence for the civil society community. And as mentioned, in the last couple of years, her interest shifted towards the inner self and inner work, and her book, New Work Needs Inner Work, together with Bettina Rollo in 2019, I can highly recommend and think will inform some of our conversation today as well. There's, of course, much more, but I would suggest this is the moment, Joana, when I pass the talking stick over to you and invite you to compliment or correct anything and everything I said.
Yeah, I mean, that was already quite a bit, Max, so thank you. I think one or two topics or themes which I think, when I think about myself, which are important, is that I've had the privilege of not really separating my private life from my professional life. And so whatever was, interesting and appeared as fascinating for myself, I somehow was able to turn that into a profession. And I've included my kids, for example, in all of my research as an anthropologist, but also, when we founded Better Place, we started a youth organization, Better Place Junior. So for me, and I think that also informs my perspective on work, which we are going to talk about now in the future of work, because I really do believe in this unity and a coherence between who you are as a human being and your self-expression in your job. And that's something I deeply cherish. And another aspect probably is that I'm really interested in the future. So my first decade was always looking at, through an anthropological lens, at globalization. So how does the interconnectedness of cultures shape our world? And then my second decade, in a way, of my working life was devoted to digitization, because I believe the digital dynamics which shape our current world and society are really fascinating. And we are just at the threshold of exploring them. And also that is so much, that I'm just fascinated by what the future will bring in that area. And now, maybe in my third decade of professional life, I'm really interested at this intersection between inner transformation and outer transformation, and how can we really use digital communications in a way which advance our social good, and how can we connect it to social innovation and not only create companies which earn more money and which stabilize or even enhance the dysfunctionalities of our societies and of our economic system, but how can we build a much healthier new system with new technology? I think that's what I find really fascinating.
Very rich as well, and you do provoke me to come in as you described how you were able to take your professional life and make it your vocation, your Berufung in German, right? I think that is the ideal sense, because it's a very difficult spark, a difficult fire to light. and to communicate to, I guess, on a scale. I think people who have that luck that they're able to pursue things that they're really passionate about can hardly imagine how it would be without that. And it's the other way around, unfortunately, is also true, right? People who just see their work as maloche, as something you go to and you do your hours and you go home, and then is when your real life starts. They couldn't imagine how work could be fun and something as fulfilling. And I think that there is a real conundrum, something that is at the heart of understanding the motivation and the drive in a economy that's hopefully post-scarcity and post-corona and post-stupid growth, which is something that we're very interested in the 42 context and to discuss with our students as we are going about their education. But to start in a more traditional way for the 42X podcasts, the first question we ask is always a question that is chosen by our interview partner, by our conversation partner. And so we have asked Joana, what question should I be asking? And she has come up with a very fundamental question indeed. And I'm looking forward to hear, how are you today, Joana?
Yeah, I mean, habitually, you know, we are so used in our culture to respond by, oh, I'm fine, you know, I'm well, I'm good, whatever, or just very busy, or, you know, we have these very formulaic responses. But I think what this new digital age requires from us is really that we are better at, that we have a better contact to ourselves, that we are better at self-reflection and lots of inner competencies. And so for me, the question, how are you, is an invitation to check inside myself and just really check on maybe 3 or 4 different levels of how am I, you know, how am I physically? You know, I'm fairly relaxed here sitting in my home office with a nice cup of ginger tea. Emotionally, I'm a bit fragmented, I must say, because I've just been to the Better Place Lab team meeting. I'm also working on a different project right now, which is also quite sensitive and preoccupies me a lot. So you know, at the beginning, this was yet another meeting I've had, or I have scheduled with you, Max. And so there is a bit of an agitation in me. At the same time, you know, we've been also chatting a bit before starting the recording. And I can also see that now I'm, you know, I have this bounciness and there's this excitement, you know, talking to you, seeing you again after a few months and hearing what you are up to right now. So it's this mix of a bit distracted agitation and you know, the bouncy part in me, which is looking forward to our conversation.
Very good, and so true. The need, or the I guess the benefit of making ourselves more aware of our practice. It reminds me of, I think it's already 5 years ago, I went to Burning Man. And we did a hugging workshop, which is a bit cliche, I admit, but it was really an experience to do all these different hugs. I mean, obviously now in times of Corona, you remember hugging all these strangers even more vividly, and it's more strange. But you know, the attention that you put into your daily practices and you know, reflecting about them, I think is a real gift, and it's part of enlightenment and the origin of a self-reflected, of a mature practice in life. And so while you know, you might say it's just a banality, and maybe even a bit hippie-ish to talk about it. I think it's very, very serious because it comes back to allowing us to understand who we are and how we perform. And that's the basis to taking any kind of decision, right? That's the basis of a free will to say, I do that or that. So great exercise.
I mean,
and right in the practice. That's what I really like about it too.
Yeah. I mean, we always talk about, human beings, but we are only practice human doing. Yeah. And so to have this balance between being and doing, I mean, for me, that's personally a challenge because I very much live in my head. I constantly have to remind myself that I've got a body and that I can ground myself. But I mean, for me, it has been really valuable to try to keep a balance between the being and the doing.
I can very much relate to that, and I'll segue over to the next question, which is also very much connected, because entrepreneurship and an entrepreneurial mindset, right, are basically the two sides of what we just described. The mindset is the way that you look at the world, the way you think about it, and entrepreneuring, I guess, would be the verb, would be the activity of doing it physically, the practice. And as you know, my PhD is actually on an entrepreneurial mindset, so very much on the reflection on the metaphysics of it. And then it comes down to doing it, and that's what you observe. That's what gets measured by a lot of the startup researchers is the money raised or the product sold, things like that. But it is both sides. So one of the goals that we have in 42 Wolfsburg is to combine the excellent technical education that you get by learning how to program with really hands-on projects to code, very little theory in that regard. But then there is the mindset aspect that makes you a happy software engineer. So for that, I see two aspects particularly important. One is the entrepreneuring, the innovating, the being creative, the finding opportunities. And the other one is the being responsible and owning what you do with the good, the bad, and the ugly, and really taking ownership, taking responsibility for that. Are there any thoughts that you have that we should consider as we're developing those aspects in the education?
Well, I've got loads of thoughts, but I just would like to pick up from what you were saying, Max, because I think that I've learned that when I only think of mindset as something to be of something I think, that I don't really use my full potential because there's so much intelligence in my, physical reaction. I think, flow is such a physical experience. It's not a head experience. It's not a cognitive experience, but it's an emotional and physical experience. So I think the kind of competencies which I like to develop are more like thinking, feeling, just more a mix of things, because I do feel that, we all know that businessmen and, everybody makes loads of decisions based on gut feeling. But it is so delegitimized in our culture. We wouldn't say, oh, this was a gut decision publicly, but there's fascinating research by Gerd Gigerenzer from the Max Planck Institute, and he did these studies with managers of large corporations and found out that I think 2/3 or so, I'm not so good with numbers, but a huge amount of major decisions was actually made based on gut reaction, feeling, emotion. This seems right, this kind of thinking, and not based on numbers. But because these decisions, or you can't say that publicly, then you get all the consultancies in, all the McKinseys and the BCGs, in order to then, in a way, after the fact, to supplement and support your gut decision with figures. But they don't really matter. So we spend in our society huge amounts of resources because we don't have a legitimacy for decisions which come from elsewhere, but not the cognitive, the intellect. And I think that's an interesting, I think we have to look at this because we are really, there is this, in German, we call it Stimmigkeit, does this feel right? And I do like the Stimmigkeit aspect because it's a decision, or is a situation, is a meeting, is it coherent? Does it make sense in a way? That's a very felt experience of something. And something can be intellectually really right and good, but still, somehow you think, no, this is not, I shouldn't go down that road. So I'm interested, how can we systematize these and also gain legitimacy for a different kind of perception? And again, include much more of the human being, because I believe that also your programmers, we all as humans are confronted with so many challenges, not only in our economy, because of course, there are so many new business models, whole industries are changing the way how they operate, but also just fundamental questions like, the climate crisis, the growing inequality within societies, just phenomena like existential needs, like the loneliness epidemic, which we are confronting. So there are so many aspects in life where I feel, if we only think about them and use figures to support these topics, we are not doing them any justice. So I'm interested in, how can we use as much of our intelligence in order to find good answers to these questions. And when I look at the workspace, and also when I look at educational environments, I feel that we are spending so much time and spending so much energy on hiding aspects of ourselves, which we don't deem to be sexy. Yeah, so like feelings like shame, feelings of, not feeling adequate enough, being anxious about something, or having anger, at mansplaining or whatever other phenomena which get me drive me up the wall. So and if we hide those, we just keep energy away from it. And if we are able to create educational institutions and work environments where people can show up much more with their full authentic self without needing to Photoshop themselves when they're dealing with their colleagues and partners and customers, I think we having a huge amount of energy dollars or energy euros, which we can use for much better purposes. And so that's something I'm excited about. How can we also become more, we in our educational system, we are so far so much, we learn so much to look, what do other people think of us? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we are so engulfed in this, what developmental psychologists call the social self. Yeah, who am I in vis-a-vis my neighbor, vis-a-vis my colleague? And in many German corporations, people, their main goal is not to stick out, not to be authentic, not to be original, but just not to make any mistakes. And I think in Germany, probably historically, you can understand it. We have this thing that in order to be really excellent and to really stick out is dangerous. Yeah, but we really want to be, safety for us is very often tied to conformity and doing things right. But of course, that, your programmers, and if you really want to create exciting, innovative solutions, you need to come from a different place. You need to come from a place where you are in touch with your own excitement, with, what motivates you, what you find deeply interesting, what is not what somebody else finds deeply interesting. Yeah. And so this shift as a collective, as a society, of how we move from a society which is pretty conformist to one which is much more self-authoring, where you are much more you're the driver of your own life, but also then even transcends that and be self-transcending and work for higher social goals. That really is a psychological maturation process, which I think an institution like yours can really, really be an exciting part of, if you work from an understanding that your programmers are not just little, working machines, but have the freedom to discover and express themselves in different ways, and also then to do that in their work.
Wonderful. What a rich little rave you had. A great vocabulary terminology stuck out to me. Self-transcending, certainly the energy, I think, is totally key and something that would benefit from a lot more practice and research, just to be aware of the energy in the room and to be able to be reflected about it in a way. When you started off the first part, it reminded me that in Asia, the contracts that you sign, they're like a formality that needs to happen. But what really matters is that you develop trust and respect between the two contracting parties. And I think that that there is a deep insight here. That when you decide to do something together, it's really the commitment and the authentic, being together in this that matters much more than what you have agreed on in the contract. Because
and I mean,
it's not going to help. Sorry.
Yeah, and I mean, I do think, we talk a lot about that digital technology enables us to collaborate in a new way. And I do think that is completely, right. It is so exciting, but at the same time, you still see that collaboration is a real art, and we are not learning it. At school, we are not learning to be co-creative. We are learning to, either, just, work on ourselves, but not really share. And this whole notion, which we know from systems thinking of, how do new things come into the world? This principle of emergence, that the new emerges out and is more than the sum of the parts, which are working on it. I think if you follow this and if you take that serious, there are a number of skills which we can also teach people. Of how to be co-creative, not be transactional. I give you an information, if you give me also one, that's not going to be very exciting atmosphere. But, meetings where people are really free to share and where one argument builds on top of the other and where really something new is developing. And then, this excitement in the air and, time flies. And those are that's the kind of culture, I would like to see in educational establishments. And that, of course, also entails the space and the trust necessary to make mistakes, because when you are a bit wild, you of course are going to make many mistakes, and to make mistakes in our society has still a very bad reputation, and I mean, I don't now mean the Mark Zuckerberg break things fast and that I don't mean that, but nevertheless to strive authentically, but then also to make loads of different, make a wrong decision and be able to own that and to not be, laughed at because of it, or even demeaned.
Makes all the sense in the world. And the bucket that we created in our school in Wolfsburg is, we call it Lebenskunst. So, the art of living your life. And it's true. Well, I observed that, of course, with my kids are 6 and 9, and nobody teaches them how to plan their lives, how to organize, and what's important for them to be happy. They're taught math and all the classical disciplines, but not these fundamental questions about happiness and organizing your life and how to live happily. Now, as you have been thinking about these topics for quite a while, I wanted to ask you to try to help us put maybe a bit of an organizational frame, some cornerstones of the way that you interpret it. Together. I've read an article that you wrote last year in Stanford Social Innovation Review, where I think one aspect you did very well was to clarify that well-being is not about spas and massages, right? It's not about self-optimization and to be able to work even harder. It's really something more. I don't know what reminded me of when Schiller talks about striving for the sublime in character. It's something more, more noble than those utilitarian and pragmatic goals. How would you describe it?
Well, I've been, as part of being part of betterplace.org and BetterPlace Lab, we've looked at digitization over the past 14 years. And for me, what has been really an interesting development is that I see less and less the tools, the applications, the platforms, less the technology, but more the digital principles behind it and how digitization changes our world in its structures and how we really see and understand the world. And for me, there are a few developments which are really exciting, where the world is becoming more decentralized in many ways, where it's becoming more fluid, more fast changing, more flexible. But all of that means that we are reducing fixed structures which we need, or which we have used for our own stability. And we as human beings need to be, we need a certain amount of safety and stability in order to be innovative and creative and grow. And because we are reducing so many outside factors for stability in our world, and also in our working environment, where we reduce hierarchies, we reduce the number of rigid processes in our work. And all of that means that people need to find a sense of stability elsewhere. If you can't find it in the outside world, you need to find it within yourself. Otherwise, we're just going to create, I don't know, 7 billion, crazy agitated human beings, not being able to hold themselves. And I'm really interested. That's why I feel that this inner perspective and inner competencies and well-being, introspection, inner reflection, self-reflection, meta-reflection, all of these competencies, and also a lot of communicative competencies, being, transparent in how you communicate, giving honest and direct feedback, and all of that, empathy. I could continue with those inner competencies, are much, much more important than in the industrial age, where we had so many fixed structures, the 9-to-5 workday, which we don't have anymore. So people, if we are taking all of this away, then people need to find much more clarity inside themselves. They need to know much more what motivates me. When is a good time for me to work if I don't have fixed working hours anymore? What is the best environment where I can be most creative? And how can I show up with my trigger points with my colleagues? I mean, all of these things, we need to now deal more of that with ourselves. And that's why I feel we are on the threshold of a really new paradigm, where we have tended, in the wake of the Enlightenment, we have seen amazing advances in our knowledge of the outer world. It's incredible what we have achieved in the last 2-3 centuries. But we don't have an adequate or a similar adequate understanding of who we are as human beings. And for me, it was really interesting to to really understand myself and my own structures. Why does this colleague annoy me? Why does this topic inspire me? What do I need in such and such a situation? I really didn't know any answers to that. And I had to do some more systematic inner work. From therapies to, some contemplation techniques like meditation and so on, in order to gain a better understanding of who I am and not be so identified with what I think is me, but to gain some distance so that I'm not constantly reacting to things, but that I can have this little moment, a pause, where I can look at myself a bit from the outside and see, that's happening right now. You are triggered because this colleague reminds you of your mother. Yeah. And so for me, that is digitization in a way. It's so easy to see it just as technology, but for me, it really comes with a whole new requirement to reinvent us as human beings, because the demands of the digital age are really very different from the demands of the industrial age. And I find that fascinating, to look at this combination of outer transformation, inner innovation. How does it? And I think we're just scratching the surface of that. But with a school like yours, you can really be part of this exploration and also invite all of your students to also create these new patterns for humanity. That sounds very big, but I think that's where we are right now.
I agree, and you know, on your very last point, one of the saddest moments recently is when you hear politicians or other leaders talk about how we get back to the pre-corona state, where I think like, oh my God, you totally don't get it. We have a huge opportunity with this crisis to be able to bring about the next chapter in how we do economics and how we govern ourselves and so on. We certainly should not just try to go back to the broken state that it was before. Not that you know, we'll get it right immediately, but it's a moment to go forward, not to come back to something that you know, was the good old days that they never were. Really fascinating points. One question that I cannot hold back is you say there was so much fluidity, so much uncertainty in a way around us that you know, having a strong stand, Haltung, is important. Now, at the same time, because of globalization and the internet, everything, you know, all cultures of the world, all possible crazy ideas and ingenious ideas are right next to each other, are, you know, one click away. And I can say for myself that leads to a very high tolerance of different ideas and life concepts. And I have a fairly hard time you know, saying this is what I stand for, and thereby, you know, I don't think this is the right way to go. So a relativism is I think widespread these days. See that? Do you think there is? We have to do something against that, or what? How would you react to that observation?
No, I mean, I do think it is fascinating, you know, when you look at AI, for example, and all the decisions which we now need to reflect on, and which, you know, there are so many important decisions which we now have to make, whereas before many of these decisions were made for us by other people, you know, and or they just, you know, were not consciously made. So I think what this, I do agree, you know, digitization exerts a huge pressure on us as human beings. And no wonder, you know, we are surrounded by disinformation, by fake news, by all of these different, you know, versions of reality. Because, you know, I think for me, it is a call to clarify who I am. You know, I think if I have an inner clarity, I am able to discern if, you know, which news is fake or which is more real. You know, there's obviously no such thing as an ultimate reality, but I can discern different news, how close they are or how far away they are from reality. But I can only do that, you know, if I am not traumatized, you know, by my childhood, if I've clarified some aspects of myself, because otherwise they will constantly trigger me, you know. And then so this is part of you know, in a way, growing up and owning more of your own shit, and having a more differentiated and clear image of who you are, and that means spending time on it. You know, I mean, it's I'm always fascinated that people think, you know, we are spending our whole education system is you know, years and years and years on learning outer stuff, which is important. You know, I mean, I do want, you know, people to know how, you know, physics works. At the same time, we don't have any space where we cultivate these more inner aspects. You know, it's only when things get bad, when people run into burnout or find themselves always in, you know, dysfunctional family situations or whatever, that they then seek maybe some help in the form of therapy or whatever. But to just have, you know, reflection, self-reflection and meta-reflection, an awareness of the process of the processes I find myself in, to have that, to cultivate that as a normal human skill, I think is really, really important. And I would like to see that in the school curriculums, you know, from first grade, because it is so important for children to be able to identify, for example, their emotions, you know. And I mean, I think many parents have a problem with difficult emotions like rage or whatever, you know, and so we tend to ignore it. We tend to put it into the corner and don't do that. Don't be so angry. No, I want children to explore their anger, because of course, that's a very vital and very strong drive. And if I know myself better, then I can also just bring so much more of myself into the world. So for me, it's really a thing of, we need to create spaces where we can cultivate that. I think the workplace is a space where, of course, the workspace is not a group therapy. We also have to be aware of that. But we can create spaces where we have more just reflective capacity, where we have more space to talk about different things like that. And one thing which I found interesting, because I did look at the chart which you have created for your curriculum, and where you have the programming skills as a very big bubble in one corner. You have also a bit of computer science, I believe, and a bit of I don't know what other topics you have, and then you have the Lebenskunst. Yeah. And for me, I think that is good, but I would say that, it reminds me a bit of work-life balance, as if work and life are separated, as if I work and then I get a bit of balance by going to the yoga studio. We have learned at betterplace, at the betterplace lab, where, as we work in a very radical, self-organized way. And we've done a lot of inner work as in the team, that really what is so important to us is that we don't really separate the life from the work so much, but that we integrate it. And that the major shift is not that we work less, but that we experience work as less stressful, because we are not so fragmented and compartmentalized in who we are, but we can show up, as we are. So for me, I think in a way, the Lebenskunst is, I think, you can really, of course, teach and practice different skills in that as a separate entity, but in a way it is all compassing, because it is how you want, your students to, to be and to communicate with one another. And I think it is dangerous if we have, one subject out of 10 being Lebenskunst, but it really needs to be integrated. And you want the way how your students, especially when you have a lot of peer-to-peer learning, you want them to know a bit of nonviolent communication and be empathetic with one another, and have human skills which are completely integrated in whatever else you are doing.
So wonderful. Thank you. This is definitely a fruitful exchange. The observation you make are spot on. And they are correct that you interpret the chart like that. However, I have good news, because our school actually, in terms of formal teaching, is fully focused on software engineering. It's the other three parts are fully integrated in a way, because it started with ethics and the values that you want to transmit, and it was clear that the co-founders of the school wanted that to be part of the education. And I really don't think that you can teach that in a special course. I think it has to be part of the way you live, and all the aspects actually that you mentioned is not something that you consume. It's not knowledge as in information that you remember dates in history. It's really something that you have to practice and understand by heart. And that's why these aspects, the Lebenskunst, I believe is really about yourself, finding your pace and to understand what you think a good life is. So it's about your life. And the other aspect, Bildung, is really the comprehensive, traditional, idealistic idea of humanistic education, where you strive for good character and to understand the world, a worldview that is wise or something like that. Again, not something that you could teach as in, okay, today we're teaching you how to be wise. This is something that grows over time. But great observations, and I'm really looking forward to have that exchange on a continuous basis to reflect how we can integrate it in our educational model. Now, when you spoke earlier about the emotions, I wanted to sneak in a little recommendation that you probably know, but maybe not all our listeners. It's the Pixar movie Inside Out. Did you see that?
Oh, no, I haven't.
Wonderful.
No, I've heard about it, but I haven't. So I'm going to write it down. Okay.
This is really a little gift, Joanna, because it's amazingly well researched. This is 5 years of research with some of the best Berkeley psychologists on emotions. And we just recently watched it with our kids, and it just gives you that vocabulary as well, because these are abstract concepts, right? Hate, rage, fear, sadness. They're difficult to to explain to kids and to everybody, actually, to even have a decent conversation. So this makes it very live, and you can remember. Do you remember the little fiery red guy that always gets up on fire? So it gave us a vocabulary that was good.
Nice.
And also, I think there is a tendency to repeat how bad our educational system is and how much work we have in front of us. I think I for one see that the homeschooling is actually working fairly well with all its clutches and so on, but I see a lot of learning happening, and I also see that my little one is in first grade. I see that there is a pretty significant development from when I was in school, from earlier decades. And they had indeed an exercise talking about their emotions and recognizing their emotions, even in first grade. So I think that's somewhat hopeful. Now, you used two terms a couple of times, and I think it might be useful if you just quickly define them, and then we can continue with the next question. But you said meta-reflection, right, and self-reflection. And especially the meta-reflection, you could think if you're reflecting, you're already doing it about something. How does the meta play in here?
Yeah, so the self-reflection, of course, is, having a certain, knowing what is happening inside me, being able to also see that I can have two opposing emotions right now. I can be happy, talking to you. At the same time, I can be worried or sad because, my mother is in the hospital. Yeah, so just having a more higher resolution of what is happening inside of you, and then also knowing what how you interact with your environment. So that for me would be self-reflection. The meta-reflection is a bit different. Meta-reflection means that I am able to step out of my immediate situation and look at it more from the balcony, more from the top, to have a process awareness. So I can now have a very engaged discussion with you. If we would have a meta-reflection, we would in a way step a bit outside of our conversation and look at how are we interacting. Am I talking all the time? Are you interrupting me all the time? That it's in reality it's the different way, the other way around. And what is the pattern between us, the dynamics between us? And so that would be to look at it more from, have a bird's eye view on a situation. And that, of course, is really, really important, because if you are constantly identified and only look at things from your own perspective and are not able to see larger patterns, in a society and in a world which is becoming so much more complex, we need to strengthen that capacity for meta-reflection, because we constantly need to look at situations which are consistent of very different shifting, moving patterns. And in groups, for example, if I don't have an awareness of how the group is doing as a group, I can't be a good group facilitator or a teacher. If I only reflected upon, if I only look from myself and I think, okay, well, the students are listening to me, I'm feeling fine, my need for authority is satisfied, that's a very different thing than when I look at me and the pupils around me from more like in a bird's eye perspective and look more at the overarching dynamics and see more the whole patterning of it. And that is something, I mean, we at the Better Place Lab try to really train this capacity, because it's not something which is naturally given to us. We usually tend to just have very much our own perspective on things. And we try to do it really more in a systematic way when we have a longer team meeting, for example, that we give ourselves 10 minutes to meta reflect and to look at what were the dynamics, where there some people who didn't, say a word because some people were dominating the discussion, where there some tensions in the room which we haven't addressed because, we were so functional or we wanted to get things done. Was there a tendency maybe to, I don't know, was the energy very low and nobody really volunteered to contribute? All of these more subtle movements, it's really, really valuable if you have an awareness for them and if you can also speak about them in the group. That
Right.
really raises the level of how you are working in a team to a completely new level, because you have an understanding not only of the thing, it's just from one perspective, but of the thing itself, and you can oversee so much more. And many people can then add their own perspectives, and that enriches your own, because you might not see that, for example, women, the female participants in the group are a bit shyer or are much more outspoken, whatever. But somebody else might have that sensibility and bring that into the joint, awareness. And that really, I find is really important. And also when you're dealing with conflicts, of course, in order to do conflict resolution, that's the skills of the mediator to be able to hold that third perspective in a way.
And you have to be careful not to say an objective perspective, because I think the differentiation that you make is from a subjective observation and self-reflection, thinking from your perspective to that outside. I get it. The police.
Yeah, which has more multiple perspectives.
Other people choose. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So this is not this, we also talk about multi-perspectivity, which comes with that you understand that, you and I have had very different upbringings, whatever experiences in life. And maybe we are going to react in a similar situation, we are going to react very differently. And that I don't then think, oh God, Max is so stupid, but that I say, well, Max, I can see, him coming from a large, I don't know, transnational or American company like Google. I mean, of course he would react like that.
True, which gets us back in a way to the earlier point about relativism, right? He only hates foreigners because he was brought up in this little village in Saxony or whatever. It's a slippery ground, and empathy, of course, doesn't necessarily mean tolerance. And I think we can have a nuanced conversation, but it's a wide field and it's not easy, and that's why it's not a straightforward just do that. It's a practice and something that needs to grow and evolve as a skill individually and as societies. Now, growing the skills that you see as relevant, the competencies, I'd like to ask you to project out, take your optimism hat and think about the future. You're welcome to choose the number of years. The further out, I think, the more easy it will get to overcome barriers that hold us in the here and now. If you go 50 years, let's say, out, what are the characteristics of new work and the educational system, the things that we talked about, that you would like to see, rather than, you believe they will come? I'd love to understand how you could imagine us living in a richer, more sustainable environment then.
Yeah, I mean, I do certainly think that the trends which we are seeing now in this whole area of future of work are going to be, stay with us and are going to progress a lot. So that's definitely, I do believe that these inner competencies, which we've been talking about, that they are going to be more formalized, that they are going to be recognized much more as important in society, and also find their way in, into institutions and things like that. I think in general, life is going to become so much more fluid. I mean, I don't think we will send our children to one place in one location in the future where learning is happening in a classroom, with, I don't know, 20 other kids also. I think that learning is going to be a much more fluid, continuous experience, and where you also learn more, both the facts and more the process awareness and the soft skills, which we've been talking about. So I am quite excited by this, and I can also certainly see the role of digital technology in that, if it is not owned by a private company. I mean, recently we read a lot about Amazon moving into the education field, and I mean, I certainly wouldn't want to have a private company run my school system, but I do think we are going to see much more agents there. There will be space for corporates, there will be a space for state education, there will also be a space for civil society taking on much more issues and organizing itself. So there is, I would think, a much richer network. And of course, I mean, when you look at the future of work, I mean, automation is going to be a huge force. So I think our very specific idea of working to earn money, to do a 9-to-5 job, that your identity is so much bound up with your work, I think that's going to change. I mean, I don't know whether the universal basic income is going to be then, but something like that is going to be part of the whole picture. So it's not only that our companies are going to change or our education system is going to change. I do think that the whole way of how you understand yourself as a human being will very likely change with so many jobs being taken by machines, or so many jobs being executed in partnership and in collaboration with machines. And I'm quite excited by this, because I feel that in a society, so many jobs are not, as we started out with, a self-expression. And I mean, to work as a supermarket cashier, I mean, you might like the interaction, you might feel useful in society, but it's not a job which I really feel is, is living your whole potential as a human being. And so if I'm optimistic about that, I do think that we will get a much more nuanced society where people will do jobs, but it might not matter so much whether they will be paid or non-paid. I do hope that more people find space to really follow their purpose. And of course, there's a whole different discussion about this whole purpose thing, but something which they find meaningful, which corresponds to their values, because I feel now so many people work in work environments where there's a big gap between who they believe they are themselves and what the institutions can offer. And so all these fundamentally shocking numbers, statistics about burnout and absenteeism at work and dissatisfaction and emotional distance between work spaces and employees. I mean, that's horrific. You think it's not a work space, it's a hospital. Yeah. And so there I see a real big potential to create new structures. And for me, the question is, who will be the innovator? I mean, at the moment, we see so many companies being innovative, and that's in many ways that is, really exciting. At the same time, I really want our government and our administration to be exciting innovators. And I know that they need to have a different pace and, do it differently. But I mean, I would be super excited to see innovation, social innovation in our bureaucracies. And also civil society. There's civil society is at the moment still so fragmented, and there are so many different little NGOs and activists, and they are all underfunded. They are all constantly, in danger of burning out and overdoing things. So that's pretty unhealthy. And I think that we can find new forms to create big social movements, whereby the concerns of civil society, which might be very different from a corporation, where they can get into a better balance. So those are the kind of questions or things I'm looking out for, more a higher diversity of sectors, a more congruent value system between, companies and or institutions and people who work there. And I feel that in our system, we are very stuck. Yeah, I mean, in many ways, change is so slow in many ways. I mean, you have something, and I mean, in that way, Corona is interesting because we are responding fairly quickly to this. But so many things, we knew. For example, I just recently read, we knew that asbestos was really, really dangerous already in 1860 or so. It took a and there were big, really representative good studies about this, and they were known to people. It took 120 years before in Germany asbestos was then delegalized, declared illegal. But I mean, that's where does that lag come from? Why can't society respond quicker? And I mean, there's so much wisdom and knowledge out there, but our institutions still, I mean, we both know this from the field of digitization. No, I mean, things which we knew were happening in the digital sphere, civil society, it took them 10, 15 years in order to, get digital in, even a basic way. I mean, I find that fascinating, why this, why we have such a lag.
I think there is a certain stiffness, I guess, in the system that really an inertia is the right term, that it's difficult to get the stone rolling. Nevertheless, I thought it was a beautiful picture that you painted, and count me in. I'm ready to join your future and to help bring it about. Looking forward to it. There was one aspect though that I'd like to challenge a little bit and see what you think, and then as I'm speaking, you can already prepare for the follow-up question that is, if this is a world that we want to have, how can we backcast and think about, the steps that we can take individually as a society, politically, as consumers and participants in the economy, etc. So where I wanted to challenge you is the potential, the potential and fulfilledness of certain jobs like a supermarket cashier or a custodian, somebody working in a museum as a security guard, things where at first glance, I totally share your observation, like how could you, we had a security guard, a night guard in the school, how is that, how can that be fulfilling? But then recently I came across a really interesting documentary. It's called The Philosopher Kings, and it's about custodians, about the janitors in universities and philosophy departments in particular. And what rich lives these people had before they ended up in that job, or at the same time they maintain a very rich life, and they really appreciate the simplicity and the way that they're on top of things, right? That there's no surprises, no pressure, and it made me reflect about maybe let's see what you think. One of the really fundamental ills of our society, and that is our competitiveness and our ambition. Ambition as such, I guess you could argue is not aggressive, but it tends to play out in a competitive way. And having two kids, they constantly compare themselves. It drives you nuts, but she had two sweets more than I did. And I mean, we all know that in theory, that comparing yourself can only lead to misery, but that's really what we do all the time. And I think a concept or a conception of our lives more around a responsibility that we have for the loved ones around us, for the society as a whole, etc., might be more beneficial.
No, I mean, I thank you for bringing that up, because I really do believe what you just said now is so true. And I could have made the same case. I mean, I know so many unhappy lawyers. Yeah, so and I do agree that in our society we are so. I mean, I was influenced. I wrote that down. I want to see that documentary. But I recently read Michael Sandel's The Tyranny of Merit, and in that book he really described this societal shift since the 80s, basically since Reagan and Thatcher, yeah, of how our society has only valued certain skills, certain elites, and how we really have devalued a whole huge group in society, because they don't have the educational credentials, and they don't fill the higher rugs of the achievement ladder. And we look down upon them. And also in politics, I mean, our political parties are filled with technocrats, filled with people who all have gone through university, a very, very similar mindset. There are very few people with diverse living backgrounds, really, who could reflect and be much more representative of the population as a whole. So I think this whole topic of being much more modest about, who am I that I have that we now sit together here, that's a huge, I mean, okay, yes, it's also partly our own achievement because we've both worked hard. We've put in a lot of working hours, but we were so lucky because of the genes we got, from our parents, from our ancestors. We were so lucky to be born in Germany and not in Afghanistan, in the middle of a war. We are so lucky that our the gifts which we have are valued right now by this society, and so, I mean, just to introduce this element of luck and grace in a way, I feel I was very much touched by that exploration, and I do feel the fragmentation and the polarization we see in society today really goes right back to that, because, I mean, yes, elites, and I count myself to that, I have a certain way of looking down on other people who are not as educated and as smart and future ready and savvy as I like to think of myself. And so I find that really a really important new function of politics, to just also be much more grounded and much more open and honest and modest in many ways. And so what I would nevertheless like to say, that throughout professions nowadays, many people are not happy in their work lives. Yeah, and I mean, again, you have the lawyers and the doctors, which are not happy in the same way as you probably also have unhappy janitors. And that aspect, I think, is something which we need to tackle, and where we have new opportunities.
Yeah, and to some degree, that was the thinking behind putting the word pace with the Lebenskunst, because I think it also has a lot to do, like, you don't have to run the whole time, right? It's really, of course, I think we should all exercise our brains and our competitiveness in a way. I'm not against that, but I think it's that hustling that modern capitalism brought with it. That frankly, the classic thinkers, hundreds and probably thousands of years, they would consider it very unknoble what we're doing, putting one meeting after the other and trying to get so many things done. That's totally not the way to
no,
anyway,
and it's such a compensation mechanism. No, I mean, I can see that, I can keep myself busy because then I don't have to confront, my inner anxieties and other stuff which is unresolved within me. So for me, it is always personally, whenever I'm super active, I like to just take a step back and observe, where does this busyness come from? Does it come from a place of joy and where I really want to go to, and where I'm being pulled to do something, or is it it more running away from myself and just keeping myself busy on this frequency, which, you know, where I function fairly well. And so that's part of self-reflection, for example, you know, to know where your inner drive comes from. Is it from a healthy or from a compensatory, slightly pathological place?
And we had the conversation before that, you know, email is such a wonderful example. You can always go and feel productive, I guess, by answering lots of emails. But it's actually to-do lists that other people create for you, and
Right.
not a healthy practice, something that I'm actually, I don't have an answer, but I would love to find a way that allows the students and the team at 42 to you know, use very little email, and no, Slack is not the solution. Slack is just putting it in a real-time channel that makes people, I don't know. Let's not go down that tangent. But
Max, I also have to say I only have I have another call.
I was aware of that. So I wanted to come back to the second part of the question. That is, are there any observations, and we can actually combine that with the next steps question that was supposed to be the last question in our conversation. Are there any observations, any recommendations for institutions, movements, things that we can do as 42 that you recommend everybody in our audience to look into in order to make the very nice vision that you described a reality?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I do feel that there are really good inner work offerings around which people can access. At the Better Place Lab, we currently are running 2 such programs, one to do with inner well-being and the other one with collaboration. How can I collaborate successfully, and what are also the inner skills necessary for that? So I think, you know, there is already a multitude of interesting and really useful resources around. You just need to dare to go there. The second thing, maybe, I mean, I think there are certain topics which I feel which are really important for your, you know, target group, and I mean many of them have to do with disinformation, for example, and with algorithm and with algorithmic ethics and all of that, you know, which you also have on your radar. There's a I'm mostly inspired when I think about, you know, what would I like your students to know? I mean, and I think you also mentioned that you have a nice library. So, you know, if I were to recommend a few books for your library, then I would recommend one of the books. And I mean, it's a bestseller, so you've also read it, and that is Roger Bregmann's Humankind, which I do feel gives a really good, well-researched spin on who are we as human beings? Are we really these, you know, self-optimizing, deep down pretty cruel animals, or are we, you know, more differentiated? And is there not a lot of kindness in humans? And I was inspired and also shocked by Nina Schick's deepfake book, Deepfakes, which, okay, if you haven't read it, I think it is really good. It's a really good book about new synthetic media and how that is going to really challenge very deeply our experience of reality. And I really am interested also in what we've touched upon right now. You know, where does our achievement society come from, and where does it go to? Because, you know, it's a phase in history. My ancestors, you know, were certainly not interested in, you know, hard work and achievement in that way. I think it is interesting, and I've been inspired by Byung-Chul Han, the German-Korean philosopher, and he has a nice book out, very slim book called The Burnout Society, which is pretty cool. And again, also this Tyranny of Merit, which I mentioned from Michael Sandel. So I think what I'm inspired by, and what I think is a next step in our society, is to develop a vision of society as something which is constantly changing, which is on the move, which is not stagnant, where change is a challenge, but where change is, a very natural move, and to see issues more in a developmental, emerging way, and not to say, oh, we've got democracy, now it's threatened, oh my God, what's happening? But to say, yeah, democracy is a system and it's going to evolve, and we are going right now in the process of building the next level of democracy, and we are going to, crowdsource and have all different kinds of people to contribute. And we have Bürgerräte and whatever, new forms we see in our society, and to just have a more developmental view of how we as individuals are going, but also how we as society are going.
What a rich set of common recommendations. They will definitely make it in our library, and I hope you will get the chance to visit us once we have this pandemic at least mostly behind us. You're more than welcome, and I hope to think on a continuous basis about how we can organize the education of our students. Thank you so much.
Great.
Awesome.
Thank you, Max. Happy to contribute.